In the film Killers of the Flower Moon, Robert De Niro plays an evil man who makes a fortune off of exploiting Native Americans, who were making millions of dollars out of the oil in their land. So many white men married Native women for the rights to their money. And on the other side of the world, in the Philippines, something similar was happening. White men were marrying Native women not for their oil, but for their gold. The year is 1901, and after lots of bloodshed, the US now has a new colony, and 4 American soldiers came back here, to the Cordillera Mountains. They came for the first time in 1899, trying to capture Philippine President Emilio Aguinaldo. They didn't catch him there, and they wouldn't catch him for 2 more years. But they did catch word about all the gold that was available in the area. We have to remember that the year was 1901. Baguio wasn't the summer capital of the Philippines yet. No strawberry taho, no duck lips. There wasn't even a road. If you wanted to get to Benguet, you would have to take a 24-hour boat ride from Manila to La Union and then spend 3 days on horseback through the Spanish-made Nagilan Trail. Or you can do what they did. Take a railway from Manila to Dagupan and then go through Quezon Road. Only Quezon Road didn't exist yet. You had to take a 3-day trek through the mountains. But after risking death to get to Benguet, these Americans failed miserably at finding gold. I mean, they didn't really know what they were doing. They were soldiers, not prospectors. But they knew there was gold somewhere because the Igorots had gold necklaces, earrings, rings. So some of these Americans would just buy the gold from the Igorots. The more savage ones would just take it from them, and some married them. The most desirable wife would be from the Bacanang class, who owned their own mines, meaning that these foreigners would be entitled to a share of the Igorot gold. But unlike in America, there was no crime boss planning out murders. No Oscar-worthy movie ready to be made. Probably because in the years that followed, a lot of the Igorot families these Americans married into would lose everything. The Philippine Organic Act of 1902 turned everything in the mountains into a free-for-all. As long as you mark an area with 2 posts, you could claim that it's yours. And imagine being an Igorot in 1902. Your family has been working these mines for generations, and then some random white guy comes along, puts 2 sticks in the ground, and tells you that he owns it now. But according to the American government, which now owned the Philippines, he did. And a lot of Igorots lost their land. Some Igorot families actually complied with the government, but their stories don't end so well either. Like the case of Mateo Carino, who donated a portion of his land to the government, and that portion is now City Hall and Burnham Park today. But apparently, that wasn't enough, because the government wanted to take his farmland too. He refused, of course, but they took it anyway. And it's Camp John Hay today. The Carinos were a pretty influential family, so he was able to file a case that went all the way to the US Supreme Court. And he won. The court upheld his rights to his ancestral land and ordered the government to reimburse him. But unfortunately, most of it went to legal fees. $50,000 worth of legal fees. And on his deathbed, he received 3,000 pesos in silver coins. So what happened to these American soldiers who married into Igorot families? Well, many of them stayed and lived out their lives in the Philippines. And you can see this in Igorot families today who carry American last names, like Murphy, Mueller, and Hora. There aren't a lot of individual stories about what happened to these Americans. In fact, I could only find 2, which we'll talk about in just a sec. But first, let's talk about the sponsor of today's video, the Alternative Minerals Management Bill. The stories we're talking about today happened over 100 years ago, but Indigenous people in the Philippines are still exploited today when mining companies take minerals from their ancestral domain. And the water they drink, the air they breathe, is being polluted. And only 1% of the profit goes to them, if anything at all. But thankfully, there's a bill trying to change all that, trying to put in place regulations to safeguard food and water sources, trying to give indigenous people a bigger share of the profit. And aside from how mining affects our indigenous people, we also have to be more selective about what we do with our natural resources. Because mining companies that are foreign owned or foreign influenced are making the most money out of the natural resources of our country. They make up around 80% of mining corporations in the Philippines. And they're the ones who are most opposed to the bill. The Philippine mining corporations, which make about 20%, are actually okay with the bill. So please, let's all sign this petition. I'll put it in the comment section and also in the description down below. Let's all do our part to make the Philippines a better place, not just for our indigenous people, but for everyone. So now let's talk about these Americans who married Igorots and settled in the mountains. This first account was written by Bill Amos, who was a young man in the Philippines in the late 1920s and early 1930s. The story goes that this American soldier married an Igorot woman, and they had several children. But when the soldier got old, he wanted to go back to America to die and be buried in the same place where he was born. But his sons, they couldn't handle that. And on his way down the mountain, the former soldier saw two of his sons, who told him how much they loved him before killing him so that his spirit would be with them forever. We don't actually know if this is true. I mean, there's no way to verify this. But we can be sure of this next story. We can read about it in many different historical documents. And it's unfortunately a sad story that includes racism and exploitation. It's the story of a man named Charles Pettit, who was part of the 1st Wyoming Volunteer Infantry. And after the Philippine-American War, he went to the mountains to search for gold, eventually marrying Dang Usan, an Igorot woman from Suyok in Benguet. And together, they recruited relatives and neighbors to go with them to America in 1904. And these people they recruited made up the 25 Kankanai Igorots brought to the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, also known as the St. Louis World's Fair. They would be part of the world's largest human zoo, which showcased an estimated 10,000 indigenous people from all around the world. But the biggest attraction was the Philippine exhibit, because America wanted to show off their shiny new colony, and they wanted to show people that Filipinos were savages, primitive people who needed to be civilized and colonized. It wasn't enough to just have them there going about their day. There was a strict program to follow. They were made to perform dances, and they were even made to eat dog several times a week. When in reality, these tribes only did this in case of certain events, like in case of an accident, and they have to cleanse away bad energy. And some people say that this started the racist stereotype that still exists today.
I never ate a dog.
That's rough, buddy.
After the fair, Charles Pettit and Dang Usan went back to Suyok, where they lived out the rest of their lives. Dang Usan passed away in 1944, and the couple had no children. And today, all the Philippine participants have passed away, and their descendants are rightfully angry at what their ancestors went through. And they have every right to be. They were exploited. But for some of the participants, they called it a journey of a lifetime. They brought back souvenirs from America, along with lots of stories. And they told these stories with much excitement. That they were exploited did not seem to bother him, or perhaps he did not want to talk about it. That's a quote from a paper written by one of the descendants. If you want to read the whole paper along with all the other papers and sources that I used in this video, you can check out my Patreon. That's free, I promise. I won't make you pay anything to read these articles. But just because they speak fondly about the trip, it doesn't mean that they weren't exploited. They probably thought about it as the price they had to pay for going on a journey of a lifetime.
The Igorots were not blind. My grandfather actually had a motive himself to earn money so that he could bring it back and then make his life better.
And I think there's something to be learned here about how we share indigenous culture. Obviously, the human zoo was wrong, right? But what about when indigenous people are posted on social media for views? Something about this obviously feels wrong, but what about getting a tattoo from Wangod without knowing anything about the culture? I actually got to talk to an Igorot leader from Bontoc about this very topic.
Ikaw, pumunta ka sa Kalinga, had your tattoo there, but do you know what experiences they had in the past. Interview nyo sila ba tungkol din sa kanilang karanasan in Buskalan? Oo, kasi Buskalan was involved in the Chico struggle at the time. Kung ang mga youth ngayon would be able to see for themselves what's happening in the rural communities and interview the people about their experiences also.
And I couldn't help think about my own experience when I got my tattoo from Wangod about 5 years ago now. Did I do enough to immerse myself with their culture, learn about their histories, to earn my tattoo? And when some people see that I do have a tattoo from Wangod, they ask me about it. And I've gotten really out of touch people asking me, what's the fastest way to get the tattoo? How do they go just in and out within an hour, just go there, get the tattoo? How do they do that? Which I think misses the whole point of getting the tattoo in the first place, right? Honestly, there's so much more to this story. There's so much more I can tell you about the St. Louis World's Fair, about what this means for sharing culture. But maybe I can say that for another video. And you can let me know if you want to see that video in the comment section down below. But in the meantime, if you want to read more about anything I talked about today, I'll put the links to all the readings I read on my Patreon. I promise I won't make you pay anything. It'll be free. So yeah, check that out if you want to know more. And if you haven't already, please do sign the petition to get the Alternative Minerals Management Bill passed. This is for the benefit of Indigenous people, but also for the Filipino people in general. And as always, shout out to my Mother Lily channel members, Ashley Martelino and Ma'am Gay Ace Domingo. You guys rock. You're the best. But until next time, peace and I love y'all.
Hoy mga Pinoy, ito na ang medisina, nagbabagong apoy, linagyan ng gasolina, kaya't tinatanong pa ba kung kanino at sino ang tiyak na puntahan sa kulturang Pilipino? Ako na ang sagot, ang dakilang gamot.